Right, y'all. Welcome on back. Welcome on back to A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles on the FCB Network, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And today we're going to get a little bit spicy. I'm talking about some cayenne pepper and Tabasco spicy. We're going to talk about a video that Steven Crowder made, and you've probably already seen it, but it's about black fatigue, whatever the hell that is. We're gonna break all that down, and I'm gonna address some of the claims that he makes during this conversation. I think it's worth talking about. But before I get into all of that, I got to remind you. You know what you need to do. You need to like this. You need to share this. You also need to subscribe if you haven't already. That way, you'll be notified whenever I upload a new episode. Also, if you really want to help me out, it only takes maybe 15 seconds. Leave me a little review telling people why you love my podcast so much. It should be obvious, but I mean, sometimes you got to let people know. Anyway, I highly appreciate all of you. Also, make sure you check out my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. You can access that at libertychasers.com, where you can see all my writings and videos and all that other good stuff about liberty and fighting the good fight. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. So Steven Crowder did a conversation with some black men at a barbershop in Indianapolis, I believe. And he's done this before, probably a few years ago. But he released a new episode of this, and he released part one last week. And very interesting. And the idea was to discuss race relations with black people, something, honestly, that I'll say not a lot of conservative pundits will do. It's just not really a thing unless they're talking to black people who already agree with them. So these conversations do need to be had. But at the same time, there's some issues here, just as always. But the topic of the conversation dealt with the concept of quote unquote black fatigue. Now, you've seen how the right has used this term over the past few months. And just before I get into some of the arguments that Crowder made, I got to deal with this black fatigue thing because the right has really bastardized this term. So the term black fatigue was coined back in 2020 by a diversity expert named Mary Frances Winters. She wrote a book called Black Fatigue: How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. And she defines it as, quote, repeated variations of stress that results in extreme exhaustion and cause mental, physical, and spiritual maladies that are passed down from generation to generation. And it basically talks about how persistent racism has impacted black people in America over history and has been passed down. And there's some aspects of the concept that I agree with and some that I don't. I mean, I've seen it also used in a way that promotes the left-wing narrative about black people being helpless victims, unable to do for self unless white saviors come and rescue us. So I've seen both sides of that, but just like I look at everything else, I look at this in a nuanced way. But here's where it gets ugly. Right-wing content creators, like Crowder, but not just him, a lot of others have been flipping this term on its head, especially on social media, and using the term black fatigue to mean white people being tired of black people or tired of hearing about black people or whatever, which is interesting because a lot of these people probably don't even live near black people, but I digress. Anyway, so they've taken a term used to describe legitimate concerns about racism, and they turn it into a justification for their own racial resentment and their own racial hangups. It's kind of like it's kind of like taking the term PTSD and using it to describe how you find veterans to be annoying. I mean, I don't, but it's just that's it's like doing that, really. It's ridiculous. So here's the thing. In this conversation, Crowder is explaining to these black men, about 4 or 5 of them in the barbershop, about why white people are experiencing the right-wing version of black fatigue, basically airing out a lot of the grievances that you see a lot of white people express online. And I really can't even say white people. This is coming from the right. This is conservatives and right-leaning libertarians and right-leaning populists. You're not really seeing a lot of this on the left. They've got their own issues that you've heard me talk about ad nauseum. But that was basically the premise of the conversation that Crowder was having with these men. So let's strap in, grab a little bit of popcorn. We're going to break some of this stuff down. I'm going to have some clips for you, all that good stuff. So right off the bat, Steven Crowder goes into crime statistics, right? I mean, that's one of the favorite talking points among right-wing commentators. Usually it's talking about the 1350 statistic. 13% of the population commits over 50% of violent crime, yada, yada, yada. I've addressed that multiple times and explained why the way they use that statistic is deeply flawed. But in this case, Steven Crowder was focusing on black on white violence specifically. And he makes a rather dubious claim that doesn't quite add up when you look at the actual numbers. So I'll go ahead and roll that for you right now.
White people are 12 times as likely to be killed by a black person than the other way around. I'm just going to shoot you straight. It's not even close.
Where?
Across the country.
Where? Like not in
the United States. I mean, we're not talking about Ghana.
In like,
yeah.
What I'm saying is, in white communities or in quote unquote so-called white communities,
across the country, the rate is a black man or person, because most murders men. There are very few female murders. 12 times more likely to kill a white person the other way around.
So you heard that, right? I mean, Steven Crowder is claiming that white people are 12 times as likely to be killed by a black person as vice versa. Now, here's the thing. Right off the bat, you hear 12 times, right? I mean, I would think that if that were actually true, I mean, regular citizens, white citizens would need a bulletproof vest just to go to the grocery store, right? So that already didn't really ring as true. I've seen a lot of memes making that claim. I haven't found any study that actually backs that up. But here's the thing. If you look at the FBI's own homicide data from 2019, there is still a disparity. So there really isn't a reason to lie about it, but there is a disparity. If the FBI's data is correct, the ratio is actually about 2%. I'm sorry, twice as likely, not 12 times as likely for black offenders to victimize white people. But here's the thing: when you look at the real ratio based on the FBI's data, if that's accurate, the actual number is closer to being twice as likely. Like black criminals are twice as likely to murder a white victim than vice versa. Now, in 2019, there were about 566 white victims of black assailants. Now, but it's also worth recognizing, too, that a lot of the arrests that the FBI records are of people who have committed multiple violent crimes or homicides or whatever you're measuring. So that doesn't necessarily mean that 566 black people murdered a white person. It just means that they were arrested for that crime. However, the numbers are still the numbers. Now, I'm going to get to those numbers again in just a second, but here's the thing. What I want to say right off the bat is this kind of the same response that I give to people who use the 1350 statistic to paint a picture that black men are generally violent. It's not true. The thing is, if you run the numbers, it's less than 1% of the entire black population in America that actually commits any violent crime, including homicide, assault, robbery, that type of deal. So it really doesn't make sense to imply that violence is an inherently black thing, whether it's because of our genetics or because of our culture. You hear both. Most people who make that argument will say that it's black culture. Black culture is violent. Well, if that were true, then there would be a lot more than less than 1% of the black population that commits violent crimes. So it doesn't really make sense to racialize this the way that they want to. But I also have to point out that when it comes to black people killing white victims, that percentage is going to be even less because the vast majority of black murderers or people who commit homicide are victimizing other black people by and large. It's about 91% of black murder victims were killed by other black people. Guess what? Want to know what it is for white people? I've seen between 80 to 83% of white victims of homicide were killed by other white people. The rest were killed by black people, Hispanics, and other races. So in reality, you're more likely to be killed by somebody who looks like you than otherwise. But here's the hypocrisy here, right? I mean, people, if you follow me for a while, you already know where I'm going with this. But let's go back to when Dylan Roof went into that black church, I believe in South Carolina, and murdered, I think, 12 black people. And we've seen other shooters do this too. We've seen it in Jacksonville, Florida. We've seen this in Buffalo, New York. What is the typical response from right-wing influencers when this stuff gets blown up? well, what about black on black crime in Chicago? See, the point is that we shouldn't care if a racist mass shooter kills a bunch of black people in one sitting because black people are more likely to be killed by other black people. Let's flip that around for a second, right? If the vast majority of white victims were killed by other white people, why should we care if a black person kills a white person, right? Why can't we flip that logic around? They never apply that to themselves. It doesn't make any sense. The hypocrisy is like abundant here. But the reality is that anybody who loses their life to murder matters. It doesn't matter what their race is. If a white person is killed by a black person, that's wrong. That black person should go to prison. If a white person kills a black person, that white person should go to prison. If a white person kills a white person, same thing. Black person kills black person, same thing. Murder is murder. When somebody loses their life to murder, it's a tragedy. And the really sad thing about this is that it's hard to talk about solutions when you have people who want to racialize this on the left and the right. It's not just the right who does this. When we racialize this and we focus on the appearance of the skin color of the person who commits the crime and the skin color of the person who was the victim of the crime, we're not able to actually have conversations about dealing with this issue. I mean, during the conversation, Crowder brought up Irina Zarutska, and for those who don't know, she was a white woman from Ukraine who was murdered, viciously murdered, stabbed to death on a subway in Charlotte, North Carolina by a black man. And you had a lot of influencers on the right exploiting her death to attack black people, to make it appear as if black people, again, are inherently violent. And one of the black men, and I'm not saying that Crowder did this during the conversation. I'm not saying that. But a lot of people did. And one of the black men in the barbershop even said, that guy didn't kill Irina Zarutska because he was black. He did it because he was crazy. The guy was an obvious nut job. It had nothing to do with his skin color. And also with the jacked up criminal justice system in cities like Charlotte and elsewhere. We're going to get to that in a second because Crowder did talk about criminal justice reform. And as a matter of fact, that's where I'm going now. Crowder also made the point that this guy had been released like 14 times and he had committed other violent crimes. There is absolutely no way this guy should have been out on the street, a point that the black people in the barbershop agreed with, by the way, because the intimation is that black people don't care about this stuff because they're going to protect their own. No, the black people in that barbershop said, no, I would never have let that guy go because the vast majority of black people wouldn't do that. Crowder pointed out that one of the judges that let him go was herself black. But he was released 14 times. It wasn't the same judge. It wasn't the same black judge. There were judges of other races who also released them. So there's really no way to insert a racial aspect to this at all, really. But the idea here that criminal justice reform, like cashless bail, ending three strikes laws, a lot of things that I actually agree with personally, and even a lot of conservatives agree with some of these policies, not all of them. The idea was that bail reform and sentencing changes somehow poured gasoline on city streets. It's like anytime somebody is not held before trial, that means that they're just going to wreak havoc and that you have to turn on the bat signal in Gotham and hope that Batman gets them or something like that. However, this isn't the case, but I'm going to let you hear what Steven Crowder said on criminal justice reform.
That's why we've done systemic justice reform that has led to more crime, right? That's the reason for no three-strike policy. That's the reason for cashless bail. That's the reason for catch and release. The reason for it, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd riots, Summer of Love, was we're going to reform crime, we're going to reform the justice system, and it's gotten worse everywhere it's been. And then when white people leave those neighborhoods, well, now it's white flight. If they come in, it's gentrification. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of people who are pissed off, and they're not going to sit down and have this conversation and be real about it. And they're going, well, what happens when someone has to keep their mouth shut about everything?
Right. So you heard that. He's saying that the ending three strikes laws in California, cashless bail and other types of bail reform caused the murder rate to skyrocket. Well, first off, the crime rate has actually been going down over the past few years, contrary to what a lot of folks on the right will tell you. Now, it is still much too high, and Democrats have made a very big mistake about downplaying it just because crime is going down. It's still a serious issue. But at the same time, homicide murder is not skyrocketing, it's going down, but it is just too high. So here's the thing. Is this the result of criminal justice reform? Not according to the data. So the Brennan Center and the University of Utah put out multiple studies since 2020 that have compared cities and states with and without these types of reforms. And guess what? Crime trended the same way in both cases. The homicide spike that happened in 2020, it hit both types of cities, cities that had these reforms and cities that did not. So realistically, saying that criminal justice reform increases crime is ridiculous. A lot of people said that about the First Step Act that Trump championed during his first term, by the way. It just doesn't hold water. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't cases where these policies have gone wrong. I just talked about Irina Zarutska's case. That is a case where these types of policies went wrong. But that does not necessarily mean that crime spikes happen because you're not just locking up everybody that you can. Like that's just not a thing. Now, this isn't to say that we don't need to be careful about some of these policies. I mean, I'm as big on criminal justice reform as the next guy, but not to the detriment of allowing people who are actually hurting other people to go free. When we're talking about violent crime, property crime, theft, things like that, those crimes still need to be punished appropriately. But when it comes to issues like, drugs, the war on drugs, a lot of that stuff needs to be thrown out the window. And I won't go into that right now because I can go on for hours about that. But the idea is that these policies don't automatically make crime rates go up. There are other factors that lead to that. Another issue that Steven Crowder brought up is related to education, right? Now, one of the biggest issues in the Black community and really across the whole country, our education system sucks. I mean, we're turning out graduates who can barely read at a sixth grade level. And this is regardless of race. I mean, this affects white students, Hispanic students, Asians, Blacks, everybody. But it's a particularly pressing issue in Black communities because a lot of Black students have to go to substandard schools who don't really have what it takes to give them the type of education that they need. But here's the thing. Here's another area where Steven Crowder, and by the way, Steven Crowder wasn't just speaking for himself. His whole premise was that he's seeing a lot of younger white people, the younger generation, who are becoming more racist. And we'll get to that too, who are becoming more racist because of this idea of Black fatigue and all these things that are happening. They perceive that Black people are getting all these special breaks from the government because of Democrats. It ain't true, but that is the perception. And I have seen people express those sentiments. So he's not wrong in saying that there are a lot of white people who have grievances because of this stuff. I'm just saying that the reasons for these grievances are unfounded. So here's the thing. One of the points that Crowder brought up is that Black students supposedly get more funding than whites. Let's take a listen.
And I don't know if you know this, Black students in this country get more spending per pupil than white students. I don't know if you know that. That's an actual fact. Even in impoverished neighborhoods through public funding. These were the reparations that were asked of white people throughout each decade given, and then we're told, no, that's not the real one. They were given, whether you like them or not, whether you think they work or not. And by the way, I think they're dog shit. I think we should completely suspend the federal Department of Education. I think the Texas state could do a much better job.
Okay, now, before getting into what Steven Crowder is saying here, I'm going to just put this out there. I agree with him 100% on getting rid of the Department of Education. There's absolutely no disagreement there. That department is trash. And if any entity is going to govern education, it should be the states, not the federal government. There are plenty of issues with the federal Department of Education. However, Crowder is making it sound like Black students are getting gold-plated iPads and lobster tail school lunches because of all this funding that Black students are getting as opposed to white students. Still not true. See, the Urban Institute and the Learning Policy Institute, who, study this stuff for a living, they tell a much different story. In schools that serve mostly Black and Hispanic kids, per pupil, spending is actually about $2,000 less than in majority white schools. It's also worth noting that more money does not automatically mean better learning. Pouring more dollars into a broken system does not necessarily do much for education. Also, we have to acknowledge that in most states, funding for education comes from property taxes, right? The taxes that you pay to be able to have your home that you own without the government taking it. Yeah, even if you paid off your home, if you don't pay your property taxes, they will steal your home. Yeah, those taxes, those property taxes. That's what goes towards education funding. In lower income areas that are predominantly populated by Black and Hispanic residents, those property taxes aren't as high, which means those schools get less funding. Even when you take into account extra funding given from the state and from the federal government, it still doesn't equal out. You still have that disparity per pupil. So that point isn't quite right. But again, if you're a young white person and somebody's telling you this and you don't check it out and you believe this, you might think that white students are being treated unfairly. The reality is that in America, our whole education system needs an overhaul, because even in areas that are getting more funding, you're not getting much better results unless you're in a very wealthy area or you're able to send your kids to private school or homeschool. That's where you're actually getting the better, the higher quality education. Next, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite thing, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is always a hot button issue, especially on the right. Every time a plane crashes, it's because of DEI. Every time you stub your toe, it's because of DEI. That's how it works. And a lot of right-wing influencers, really hammer on this, especially when it comes to higher education. So Steven Crowder goes into this issue and talking about how white students are being passed over for Black students.
And what I mean by that is, if we're trying to understand it, you said you have power in all those institutions.
Yes.
What if, for example, you have an entire generation of people, young white men, women, who if they apply to a college or apply to a job, they don't have a grant, there's no Pell Grant, there's no type of subsidy, there's no DEI initiative. As a matter of fact, they're likely to be passed over. They hold no.
So here's the thing about DEI, whether you're talking about in employment or in hiring or in college admissions. Here's the truth. I mean, the narrative is that a bunch of unqualified Black students are getting into these colleges and they're not able to add up. And then they go out and get jobs because of DEI that they're not qualified for, because companies like to hire people who can't do the job because as long as a person isn't white. But the thing is that this narrative isn't quite true. There's some nuanced truth to it. I'm not going to say that it's never happened that unqualified Black people or Hispanics or what have you have been enrolled when they probably shouldn't have. That has been. I'm not convinced that it's as widespread as people on the right say it is, and they have never really even provided evidence of this. But anyway, let's go ahead and go on here. The thing is, if you look at the National Bureau of Economic Research's analysis on this and the history of DEI, you're going to see that it doesn't really help Black people. It helps white women. It doesn't help Black students. It doesn't help Hispanic students. The biggest beneficiaries of DEI, whether it relates to college admissions or getting jobs, employment, promotions, things like that, the biggest beneficiaries are white women. It ain't Black people. So the notion that, the thing is, if young white people are mad about this, they don't need to be mad at us. They need to be mad at their women. It's their women who are supposedly taking their jobs. But realistically, that's not even as much of a thing as they would have us think. Plenty of the unemployment rate for white Americans is far lower than it is for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and yada, yada, yada. Let's also not forget that when we're talking about elite colleges like Harvard and all of those, it's the ultimate admission boosters are not race, but legacy. A lot of white students get into these colleges because they are the children of people who went there, or the children of high profile individuals. Now, I'm not saying that means that they're unqualified. They might be, but I'm pretty sure there are a lot of white students who got into Harvard that probably didn't need to be there just because they were born to the right parents, right? I mean, let's just be real. That happens. So am I a fan of DEI? Not really, but not for the same reasons. I mean, I don't have a problem with diversity. I don't have a problem with inclusion. I have issues with the equity part of that because that tends to mean something that the left doesn't say it means. But it also has been used in a way that is divisive in the workplace and in elsewhere. A lot of these DEI trainings, not all of them, but a lot of these DEI trainings have been used to place a wedge between minorities and white people by casting white people as the villains, minorities as the victims, And, it just kind of creates that tension. That's why I have issues with DEI. It's not because you're going to hire a rocket scientist who doesn't even have education in rocket science, right? That's not happening, by and large. But if you want to prove me wrong, go ahead and try. Show me some stats. Show me that these companies are hiring tons and tons of Black people and LGBTQ people that aren't qualified for the job, and that their companies are suffering from it. You're not going to be able to, because I've already looked. I wanted to disprove my own premise, and I couldn't. So again, this is another wedge issue that media on the right and the left use to divide Americans. There's a common through line with everything that I'm talking about here, and it's division and trying to diminish any unity that we might have left. Next, we're going to talk about the police. We love the police, right? I love the police. Sting was a great singer. I love their music. Great music. Every breath you take, all that stuff. Yeah, that's the police I'm talking about as far as the ones that I like. Not the police that Crowder is talking about here. So there's always been a debate over how police treat Black Americans versus white Americans. And these conversations are very contentious, but they're also very nuanced. The reason why they're so contentious is because nobody wants to be nuanced about it. So I'm going to let you hear what Crowder had to say about it, because he cites a study from a professor named Roland Fryer from Harvard, which became a very controversial study. So I'll let him talk about it.
We look at Roland Fryer from Harvard, who conducted black professor, really respectable guy, honorable man, conducted a study, and he came out and he said, yeah, all of my research says that Black men are 0% more likely to be shot by police officers than whites. Black people got so mad at him, he reconducted the study, a black man from Harvard, and he came to the same conclusion, and now he's not black enough.
So I'll say from the get-go that Crowder is right. Roland Fryer's study did show that when it comes to fatal police shootings, Black victims are not more likely to experience that than white victims. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why when I talk about police brutality and disparities between how Black people and white people are treated by the police, I don't always bring up shootings, because one, that's a lot more nuanced. There's a lot of situations where the police officer gets attacked and they have to shoot. There are situations where the Black person's unarmed and not a threat, and the officer chooses to shoot. We also have situations like Daniel Shaver, Ryan Whittaker, white people who were murdered by police as well. So the thing is, the other issue is that when we only talk about shootings, that really diminishes the actual issue. Police brutality, police misconduct goes far beyond shootings. Now, I get that those are the sexy news stories that we hear about and that people will protest and march for and debate on the airwaves and interwebs about. But police brutality also involves officers abusing their authority, getting violent with people when they don't have to, even if the encounter is not fatal. There's something that Steven Crowder left out about Roland Fryer's study. He talked about the part involving police shootings, but he left out the instances in which police officers abuse people as far as getting violent, pushing people up against cars, punching them, beating them when they're not resisting or they're not a threat. So here's the rest of what Fryer was talking about. And by the way, Roland Fryer did get into a lot of trouble for the study. And it's funny because on the right, they usually leave out what I'm about to talk about. On the left, they attack him for his findings on police shootings, but they will talk about other instances of non-lethal force. So on non-lethal uses of force, Blacks and Hispanics are more than 50% more likely to experience some form of force in interactions with police. And this is true even when you control for the behavior of the civilian, like people resisting, things like that. He's talking about instances where people aren't resisting, where they are not a threat, and they are still more likely to be touched or pushed or beaten, handcuffed, pepper sprayed, or struck with batons. Even among people who were compliant and weren't even arrested, Black people were still 25% more likely than whites to have physical force used on them. So there is a racial disparity in that aspect. So that's why I say that when we talk about law enforcement, we need to back up and take a more holistic view of this. And I'm not even talking about practices like civil asset forfeiture, where law enforcement can literally steal your property without convicting you of a crime or even charging you with a crime. They don't even have to arrest you. This happens way more to Black people and Hispanics than it does to white people. I've written countless articles on this. Like if you get pulled over by a police officer and let's say you have $500 in cash, all the officer has to say is, I think that money was used in a drug deal. I'm going to steal that. And then it's going to go to the police department. And good luck getting it back, because navigating that system requires attorneys in a lot of cases who are more expensive than the value of the property. They don't just steal cash. They will steal your car. They will steal your house. Anything that they can say has been used to commit a crime without even having to prove it. More on that later. Again, that's another topic where I can go for hours about. But again, when Stephen Cryer, when, I did not do that on purpose. I kind of wish I had though. Anyway, Steven Crowder was right in his assertion, but he was incomplete. And it's important that we have all the facts. I mean, if you're going to sit down and have a conversation with people about these issues, you got to be willing to acknowledge things that may go against your preferred narrative. So I don't know, maybe Steven Crowder didn't know about that part. Maybe he didn't read the whole study, or maybe he didn't read up on the articles that were written by the study and he just saw that one part. I can give him the benefit of the doubt. He should have done his due diligence if that's the case, though. Anyway, let's go. Let's go on. Now, the last point that Crowder made that I'm gonna address, which he made other points too. I mean, if you want to watch the video, you can. I mean, there was a lot of things that they talked about, and I know he's going to be releasing part 2 soon, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I may do another episode on this. But the last point that I want to cover is the notion that white people are silenced. They're not able to talk about issues related to the Black community. They're not able to directly criticize Black people, or they're not even allowed to talk about anything that could be construed as involving Black people. Let's go ahead and hear what Crowder has to say.
What I'm saying is Black fatigue is white people going, you know what? I know I'm not racist. And I know that we're dealing with record crime, and I know that I'm more at risk. And they have negative interactions, and they're constantly told that they're not allowed to voice their fucking opinion because they're white. And if those people get pissed off, like that's where we actually could end up with some kind of, I'm telling you, I see this brewing. I see people who were milquetoast white suburban who are becoming actually racist. Now, not all of them, but I've seen people actually become racist because they get mugged, their store gets looted, and nothing gets done. They're going, and if I say something, it's turned into a racing. I'm telling you what, that's where it's coming from.
Okay, so right off the bat, he says white people are being killed in record numbers right now. Now, I don't think that's true because crime is going down, but let's say it is. That would mean that white people are being killed in record numbers by other white people. It's not Black people doing this to you. As I said before, white victims are far more likely to be killed by other white people. There's no reason to be blaming Black people for this, because if that disparity didn't exist, white people would still be killing white people. That's what we should be caring about. Anybody who is a victim of murder, regardless of race and regardless of the race of the suspect, that should be an issue. Instead, again, people are racializing it. And again, I'll say again that Crowder is talking about what a lot of white youth are thinking. I'll say a lot of white right-leaning youth, because I'm not hearing this come from the left, really. But the problem is, again, this isn't about Black people in the way that a lot of influencers want to make it. But the idea that white people can't talk about these things just seems to be a little ridiculous. I mean, you don't even need to look up data on this. You can just kind of think about what he's saying and understand that he's wrong. Steven Crowder is saying this before a group of Black people who are having a conversation with him. I didn't hear anybody call him racist in that conversation. Maybe that'll be in the second episode. I don't know, the second half. Nobody called him racist. Now, they definitely disagreed with him, and they disagreed with him vigorously, which is what we should be doing. We should be having these conversations. Not a single person in that barbershop laid a finger on him. So the idea that people can't say what they want, Crowder said what he felt. Crowder, he was honest about how he felt and about how he perceives what young white people are hearing and their attitudes. Commentators like Ben Shapiro and a lot of others have spent hours upon hours talking about black crime or even crime in general that involves black people. They say it all the time. You go, if you don't believe me, go on X right now. You don't even have to look at Crowder or Ben Shapiro. Just go on X for a few minutes and put in black crime. There are people, white people, talking about it. Nobody is calling for the government to come in and throw them in a cage because they said some stuff that they didn't like. Now, societally, people might disagree with it, but guess what? White people who want to criticize black people have the right to free speech. People who want to criticize those folks for what they say about black people also have free speech. That's how free speech works. That's why it's such a beautiful thing. So I'll try, I'm going to try to be fair here. I know cancel culture is a thing. There have been people who have lost their jobs because they said something online that people didn't like. In a lot of those cases, these people did say legitimately racist stuff. And there are people who say legitimately racist stuff about white people. And I don't see a lot of them losing their jobs, or if it happens, it's not reported on as much. I mean, I can't remember. I think it was a Washington Post. Some Asian chick was saying some stuff about white people. I think recently, maybe like a year or two ago, there was a black professor who said some stuff about white people, got fired. But it's happened in the other direction as well. The bottom line is, you have the right to say what you want. The company that employs you has the right to associate with you or to disassociate from you. If they don't want somebody working for them who doesn't reflect their values, they're going to fire them. My day job, I work for a conservative outlet. Imagine what would happen to me if I got on Twitter and I'm like, oh, I hate white people. White people suck, blah, 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 blah. You think I would be employed much longer? Probably not. If I owned a company and one of my employees started talking about how horrible black people are or how horrible white people are, I'm going to fire him. I'm sorry. I don't want somebody working for me who doesn't share my values. And people, they have the right to choose what to do with their property, whether it's a venue, whether it's a company, they have the right to do that. You may agree with it. You may disagree with it. I honestly don't care. There are instances where people say things that are not racist and then they still get fired. That is a problem. That does happen. So that's an issue. But still, I'm still seeing a lot of white people talking about black people on X and other platforms. All these videos that they show of black men being violent, I like to call it black man bad porn, because the people who disseminate this stuff, I think they have a problem. They just love to see black people fighting. It's weird to me. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe they have some weird fetish that they need to seek some help for. But the problem is that they do that, and the intent is to portray black people as violent. Well, guess what? Some people aren't going to like that. They're going to call that racist. And honestly, people, you guys whining about this being called racist when you're actually saying racist shit, I'm sorry, like you sound like something I can't say right now. Like it starts with the P and ends with the Y. And it's kind of pathetic. If you're going to say these things, then stand behind it. Back it up. Don't whine when you get criticized. It's ridiculous. Now, for the people who are going to try to get these people fired, that's also wrong. But at the same time, if you're saying this stuff, you know that could happen. You know what you're getting into. You don't have the right to have whatever job you want and be able to say what you want. That's just the way it is. Go work for a company that is okay with that. Go work for Gab. I don't know. Go see if you can get a job from Andrew Torba. He's perfectly fine with that. But the idea is, one thing I will say as I'm getting to the end here, people should say how they feel. And I don't like, people using the mob to go after people when they disagree with them. I don't like when I don't think that people should be doxxed for saying things that people don't like. That happens on both sides. That is an issue that we have to deal with. But again, is this black people's fault? By and large, is this black people doing this? Yeah, I'm sure some are. But honestly, if you're a white conservative, the people who are doing these things to you look like you. They just happen to have purple hair or whatever. I mean, that's just the way it works. White progressives are your biggest enemy, not black people. Like, honestly, most black people are just trying to make ends meet. We're just trying to go through our everyday lives and do our things, just like most white people are. So to me, you're focusing on the wrong enemy. But this is where I'm going to transition into what this all adds up to for me. Here's something that we just don't talk about enough. I've been shouting this from the rooftops. I know other people have too. But when we talk about race relations, we have to understand what's happening here. We have to stop falling for the psyop, and far too many of us are black, white, Hispanic, left, right, Democrat, Republican, populist, LGBTQ, straight, cis, or whatever you want to call it. I don't care. We're all falling for this. Here's the thing. A lot of white people are trying to make ends meet. There are a lot of white people living in poverty, having trouble getting jobs, dealing with inflation. Who's doing this to you? I mean, who are the ones that are taxing you to death, driving up grocery prices? Who is doing that to you? Who is trying to actually throw you in a cage for the things that you say or the things that you believe? If you were targeted as a Catholic by the FBI who wanted to spy on you, who did that to you? Who labeled you domestic terrorists just because you showed up at city council meetings and school board meetings to, express concern about what your children are being taught? Who is practicing legalized kidnapping of children under false allegations of child abuse, tearing families apart? Who is sending your kids to die in unnecessary wars for a corporate profit while they call it spreading democracy? Who is stealing money out of your paycheck twice a month? Who is making you pay protection money just to be able to live in your home on land that you own? Who is dumbing down your children? I'm going to give you a hint. It's not black people. I promise we're not doing this to you. I've never done. As a matter of fact, I stand against it. It's not black people who are doing this, and I'm not even going to say it's white people. It's the government. Now, most of the people who run the government and also other institutions like the media, education, academia, entertainment, most of them are white. And if you're going to come at me with the Jew stuff, just turn off this video, please. Go away. I don't want you to lower my IQ. I don't want you to affect my intellect with your retardation. It's white people who run these things. But guess what? Here's something that Crowder said that I 100% agree with. Most white people don't have institutional power. You don't. Yes, most of the people that run these institutions happen to be white, but they don't represent you, do they? They don't represent you. They never have. They never will. They're not there to represent you. They're there to grow fat, wealthy, and comfortable at your expense and at our expense. So when I'm talking about the enemy that we have, it's not really about skin color, because even though it's mostly white people who run these institutions, there are black people involved. There are Hispanics involved. There are Asians involved. It's the government, stupid. It's the government and the elites who run it. It's the media. It's all of these institutions that are run by the elites. And what is their biggest weapon against us? Because we're letting them do it. Don't make a mistake. They're not doing this against our will. We are allowing them to do it. And the way they're doing it is by dividing us, by racializing everything. There are situations where race is relevant. I'm not saying that that's not the case. That there are times when race is a factor. That the black guy who drove his truck through a crowd of white people during Christmas, I believe that was in Wisconsin a couple of years ago. In that instance, it's appropriate to mention race because race had something to do with it. The guy who shot up a bunch of Hispanics at a Walmart in Texas did it because he was white and he hated Hispanics. Then it makes sense to mention it. And there are other instances where race might be relevant. But I would say in most of what I've seen as far as political discussions go, race doesn't have much to do with it. It's about government corruption. But they use race and other issues to divide us. That is the most powerful weapon they can use against us. And it's not just the institutions, it's the people who help them. Social media influencers, politicians, so-called journalists, commentators, people who are responsible for molding opinions. Murray Rothbard referred to them as the opinion molders. They keep us divided because if we were to unite, if the average black person were to unite with the average white person, I don't care if it's a redneck from Appalachia, if they were to sit down and talk, they would realize that they have far more in common than in difference. And in this way, by putting each other, and in this way, by putting us at each other's, and in this way, by putting us at each other's throats, they can pick our pockets while we're trying to focus on what the white man is doing or what black people are doing. And unfortunately, a lot of talking heads, a lot of influencers, they play into this. Some of them are doing it on purpose. Some of them are doing it because they're also falling for the psyop. But the impact is the same. We are being led to be afraid of one another, which leads to hate, which leads to all kinds of horrible things. I believe it was Master Yoda who teaches us that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. I think right now we're in the hate stage of that, or I would say we're getting to the hate stage. I'm not going to say we're all the way there yet. We're probably still in the anger stage right now, but it's not going to get any better if we don't do something about this, if we don't change the way that we think about the issues, if we don't change the way that we look at things. We are far too hyper partisan. We look at things through the lens of left and right. We don't look at things through the left of right and wrong. And until that changes, it's going to get worse. It's just going to get, I mean, we just saw Charlie Kirk get assassinated last month. That is a boiling point. And I did a video on that. I did a podcast episode about that. I think that we crossed a Rubicon there, but I mean, there's something, it's up to us. I mean, we can't expect somebody to rescue us, and a politician isn't going to save us. So here is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Refuse to let Twitter become real life. Don't allow your real life to look more like what's on the internet. You probably have already experienced this. When you go out to the supermarket or you go out to an event or whatever, you generally see people of all different backgrounds getting along. Twitter has not become real life yet, but sometimes it does seep into real life, like what happened with Charlie Kirk. That was an example of how this online culture bleeds into real life with disastrous consequences. To Crowder's point about young white people becoming more racist, if that is happening, it's not because of black fatigue. It's not because of black people. We're not doing this to them. You know who is doing it? People online who are radicalizing others. This applies to influencers. This applies to even more shady characters. Anytime you see a young white person carry out a mass shooting, it's because they're radicalized online. Whether they're on the right, like Dylan Roof, or whether they're more on the left, like the person who shot Charlie Kirk, or the person who shot up Annunciation High School, or Annunciation Catholic School, they're always getting radicalized online. Black people aren't going to their neighborhoods and say, "Hey, we hate you. We're going to beat you up. Oh, don't shoot us." That's not happening. What is happening is that there are forces in this country who are deeply invested in keeping us at each other's throats, and people are falling for it. So if Crowder is right, and you're going to turn out a generation that is more racist than the last, I would blame our institutions before I would blame an ethnicity. That's stupid. It doesn't even make sense. And the sooner we realize that, the better off we will be. While the elites want us fighting about pronouns, we should be actually seeking ways to come together. We should be waking up to the reality that we're all getting screwed. We're all getting screwed. It's a very small select group of people who aren't getting screwed in some way. And those are the people doing the screwing. So until that changes, we're going to be headed towards something that none of us want to experience. So I would urge you to maybe just take a different look at things. You may not agree with everything that I said in this episode. That's fine. We can have these conversations. I can have these conversations in a civil manner. I don't care if you disagree with me. That's fine. If you don't get anything else from what I just said, get this point. There are people out there, if you're a young white person There are people out there who want you to hate me and to fear me because my skin is darker than yours. That happens on the other end too. People on the left want people like me to believe that there's a white KKK member behind every tree who wants to lynch me. Both of them are lying to you. We can talk about these issues without hating each other. We might get angry. We might get heated. That's fine. As long as we're able to talk, that's when we can start moving forward. And I am glad that Steven Crowder actually did go to the barbershop, because it gave people a chance to see that conversation. It gave people like me a chance to respond to it. Even though I disagreed with most of what Crowder said, at least he had the conversation. And to me, that's the kind of thing that's going to move us forward. Don't look at the issues in terms of what your tribe or what your political party wants you to think. Think for yourself. Do your own research. If somebody makes a claim, take it with a grain of salt. Even if you trust them, take it with a grain of salt. Do your own research, and actually talk to the people who you're being encouraged to hate. You're going to find out that they're not nearly as bad as what you've been told. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thanks for listening.